Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Doodle to Doing. I'm your host, Karen Light, creative executive function coach and Doodle Empress at How Doodle. Today, we are talking about how to become boundaried AF with a note coach, Suzanne Culberg. Hello, Suzanne.
Hello, Karen. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yes. Would you want to take a minute just to introduce yourself to everyone?
Certainly. As you said, my name's Suzanne Culberg. I'm joining you from Sydney, Australia. So for the time of recording this, it's the future for Karen. I help people pleasers who ignore themselves learn to set boundaries and say no to others so they can say yes and actually take care of themselves.
Radical. I wish that wasn't radical, but it is, right? For so many people.
That is such a good point. Yes. Well, I wish it wasn't radical either, but yeah, that's the times we live in, unfortunately.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know a single person, myself included, who hasn't struggled with this. So I'm really happy to have this conversation with you. And I always like to get started setting some intentions.
Ooh, I like this.
So I like to start my intentions with what I call the spirit of a doodle. This is what I believe doodling and maybe life can be about when we're really in a good space. So what I like to invite my guests to do is to pick out the word or phrase that's jumping out to you in relation to our topic today.
The phrase that is jumping out at me is, let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens. And how would you connect that to setting boundaries and being a boundaried person?
Well, often we assume, and they all know what you say when you assume, that when we say no or when we set a boundary, that the person will be upset or annoyed or hurt or frustrated. And it's honestly been my experience that 9 times out of 10, maybe even more, people actually, I wouldn't quite say enjoy, but there's some safety in the boundary because you know what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Without that, you don't know. So personal example, I'm in mourning right now. My mum has passed recently. I have been very clearly boundaried on what I am open for and what I am not. And I hadn't made the connection until somebody said to me, like, you're basically living your work, because people don't know. And some people, they want to express how they feel, or they want to connect in that way. And I don't actually find that helpful. And it's like, do you want to support the person going through the thing, or do you want to make it all about you? So let's see what happens. When I said to my immediate family, this is how I'm going to roll with this, they're like, oh, nobody will ever respect that. Like, people want to have their voice or express their condolences. I'm like, well, that's not a good fit for me. And everybody has been really respectful. There's only been one person who, kind of made it all about them and started the crying thing. And I basically said, love you fiercely. I'm not here for this. Like, this needs to stop, or this conversation will end and we'll chat later. And they were a bit taken aback, but they were like, I actually appreciate that.
I mean, I love that you chose that one and talked about it, because I think it gives somebody guidance on how to be with you. And people are we are complicated humans in a lot of ways. And to have somebody say, okay, this is how you can be with me right now, is like, oh, okay. It's like a little roadmap, a little how-to to you. Thank you. Because usually our intention is to be with somebody in a way that feels good to them.
Yeah, and I've got another example that's kind of a morose example, but a happier example is something like a wedding where you have a wish list. These are the things that we desire in our home. You know what to buy. You're picking from what the person actually wants, rather than ending up with like 20 toasters.
Yes. Or like knickknacks that you don't want at all, right? Like,
or towels that don't fit your color scheme. Like if you have a color scheme, or if you have, so another example, something really random. If you've got like skin sensitivity, like my daughter just went on school camp, I sent my husband to buy the sunscreen. It didn't even occur to me. And anyway, he bought this other brand and then she couldn't use it. And was like, so if you say, I need this type of sunscreen, you might be thinking, well, I don't want to be demanding or like a diva or whatever. And it's like, but if they don't know and they buy the other one, not only can you not use it, but then you kind of feel awkward. So it's like, I want this brand of sunscreen. You can choose how much you want to explain about it, but people feel better. Oh, I'm looking for this one. That's the one that they want, rather than there's like 50 types of sunscreen. I don't know.
Right. Which is like how you could be with somebody who is in mourning, right? Like there's like 50 different ways you could approach that. And if you just let them know how to approach you, then it's like, okay, then I can walk over here and fall in line with that.
And you
Because
can also select yourself out. Like sometimes somebody's boundaries are a great tool. It's like, oh, okay, so this is how they want in this space. It's not a fit for me. I can see myself out, and nobody's wrong or bad or pretending or people pleasing. It's just like, this isn't the space for me. Like if you're like, Suzanne, let's go orienteering or archery or something. Thank you so much for inviting me, Karen. That's a no from me.
that's
Have fun.
yes. Absolutely. Okay, so let's practice a little bit of this letting go by warming up our doodling muscles. So I'm going to invite you to grab a texter. I just learned that word, y'all. Like, never heard it called that, but now I'm obsessed. A texter, aka marker or pen or utensil of some kind. And we're going to warm up. I always like to warm up with a simple shape to help people feel comfortable in this process. And I feel like this one is very appropriate. We're going to warm up with a square today. So we're going to start by just drawing a square somewhere in your paper and then playing with it however you want to. Maybe you're repeating it. Maybe you're coloring something in. Maybe you're just tracing the same line over and over again. Let's just get warmed up with this square because it's going to reappear in our doodling prompts later. And really practice letting go. Let's see what happens. You're not trying to force it into something. The square is just wanting to go wherever the square goes. How's your square doodling coming along?
It was interesting. At first, I was like, oh, what is it supposed to look like? Like, I need some more directions here. And now I'm just kind of going with it.
Yeah, let's see what happens. Yeah, so let's see. So here's what I've got so far. Here's my square play. How about yours? Ooh, how fun is that? Oh, it got like, yours looks so meta to me. Like, ooh, it's a square within a square within a square.
Got an inception happening.
Yes, exactly. The layers. So whatever your square looks like, it's fine. It is a shape you can return to at any point during this workshop. If you don't know what to do to a doodle prompt, you can just do some squares. You can, while you're listening to us, you can color in the squares. Just, all that stuff helps you retain information and pay attention to it in your own way. With that being said, let's jump into the first question that I have for you, because I think we've already started talking about it a little bit, but it's so relevant to almost everybody I know, including myself. And I really like how it, looking through some of your materials, how you word this. You talk about how to say no without feeling like a bitch. And I'm just like, yes, right? Because especially if you come from a people-pleasing background, then anything that doesn't go along with somebody else's idea or what you think somebody else's idea is, I know from experience, I've had anxiety. Oh, they're just going to think I'm being like picky or like bitchy or whatever. And I don't want to upset those people necessarily. I know that they care about me, that they have good intentions, that they want the best for me. So, what have you learned about why we feel this way? Why is it so hard for us to say no?
A lot of the things that you just mentioned, like I don't want to be picky, or I don't want to be demanding, or I don't want to impose. One of the biggest things I've learned is those of us who struggle to say no, people pleasers, if somebody needed anything, we would be the one. We'd be like, I drop everything, I am there, like bells, whistles, I'm the person. However, when we need anything, we don't want to ask because we don't want to impose. And I remember the day that I was working with my own coach who was like, well, what are you saying about the people that you help if you're free to do anything for them, but you won't dare ask because you don't want to impose? She's like, I was not connecting the dots. She's like, so when you help people, they're imposing on you? I was like, no. And then I was like, oh. well, maybe. And sometimes it is. Like if someone's like, could you do this? It is imposing. Especially like, so say this time this morning, say one of my kids is like, Mom, I need you. And I was like, I can't come to the podcast, Karen. I've got to help my kid look for her lost sock, or, you know, usually it is something like, obviously, if my kids legitimately needed me, if there was blood, if there was an emergency, if we need to go to the hospital, of course. But a lot of the times, the things that we drop everything for are not urgent or time sensitive. And where we think that we're helping, we're actually enabling. And it was like, oh, this is a whole messy, murky field. So if you're listening to this, you're like, I don't want to hear this, Suze. It's okay. I didn't want to hear it either. But it's kind of like learning to differentiate between, if you legitimately need me, I am there, versus can this wait an hour? Or does this need to be done by me even? Or am I actually helping, or am I enabling your poor behavior? So by saying, you know, no to people, and sometimes there is consequences for the actions. I remember the very first time I said no to helping my kid with her homework, and she got a bad grade. And, you know, people might think, oh, you're the worst mum, Suze. But what did I teach her? Like, next time, you don't come to me at 10 o'clock the night before saying you need a diorama tomorrow. You've had weeks. So it's like letting people learn that they need, you know, when to ask, how to ask, and how to be supported, and not to dump all your stuff on someone else and expect them to do it for you.
Yeah. It's like natural consequences, as you know, as somebody who taught a long time, it was hard for me a lot of times, you know, like I just wanted to help them more and more and more and more and more. And let me just hold your hand through this whole process. But then you're like, well, I cannot do that for 30 kids in every class. Like I have to be willing to let people face natural consequences. And in life too, right? Like there are things that come up with people in my life where I think, oh, they really are depending on me to be there or do this thing for them. And then I remember having this epiphany one day of like, oh, what does it mean if I'm not? Oh, they might have to expand their circle of people in their lives. Like they might have to find other people. Okay, well, if that happened, that would sure take a lot off my shoulders. Oh, wait, I'm carrying that. I'm carrying the responsibility for them in this area of my life. It was such a like a wake up call. It didn't mean it changed it overnight, but it was just like such a realization. And I'll have to say that what comes up in that space too, when I think about it, is also the internal grappling of, okay, what's my role now? Like,
Yes.
you know, now who am I to these people? And it's a very legit, will they value me still in their life if I don't fill this particular role? And a lot of times, yes, but sometimes no. And you know, then you have to deal with those situations as well. When your worst fears are kind of affirmed, because it does happen.
Yeah, it does. And it just makes me think of that phrase, like in service or of service. So it's like, if I'm in service, I'm constantly dropping everything. I'm ignoring my needs. I'm, you know, inconveniencing myself because I don't want to inconvenience somebody else. But it's like, and it's all their issue. Like if you're like, I'm moving house tomorrow and I need you to help me come pack, like you've known for quite some time that you need to move house. Like a lot of these things are urgent because the person hasn't had the wherewithal to organize it. By rescuing them, by jumping in, they're not actually learning anything. And sometimes, you know, we need to learn the lesson. Like my kids, when she gets homework now, she brings it home immediately that day after school. We make a plan. And also, I don't check in with her anymore. I don't go, have you done it yet? Have you done that? Because these skills that she's learning now, when she moves out of home and she's got to pay her own bills and cook her own food, I'm not going to be there all the time going, have you got clean socks? Like, so it's actually teaching skills that will be useful in the lifelong rather than smothering too much. Like I like to say, you know, M's for mother, not for martyr or for maid.
Yes.
These are the things like today, after school, because I'm coming to record this, my husband's taking the kids to school. I'm like, when I get out of this call, I expect bathers. It's what we call swimwear. I don't know what you guys call it.
Okay,
Bathers.
no idea. I was like going to say, what? They're
They've
taking a
got swimming
bath?
lessons
Like,
after school. Like that needs to all be set out so that after school we go. Otherwise, we'll be late. And I don't personally like being late. That's a boundary crossed for me, so you miss your lesson. And yeah, a couple of times they have, but then they learn, oh, I've got to be organized. I bet you anything I'll get out there. It'll all be laid out exactly where I asked it to be. So I'm not running around looking for a goggle trying to get us out the door.
Okay, so I want to pause right here for a doodle prompt. And I want you to think about, those feelings that come up for you that aren't so pleasant when you think about setting a boundary. Maybe it's this fear of that person not accepting you anymore, or their disappointment, or, what your identity or role is with them. But whatever that feeling is, I want you to take a second to doodle it out and make it into
On this same page or another one?
whatever feels good to you. Good question.
Okay.
Whatever feels good to you. There's no, I guess, preciousness about these doodles. But I want you to doodle that feeling out for just a minute, whatever comes up there.
You can probably hear it. To say there's some rage happening with this.
It's interesting what's come up for me. So I want you to do one more thing on that doodle before we share it. And however it's turned out, I just want you to give it like a characteristic that would make it a little character. So maybe there's some eyes or a mouth or limbs or whatever turns it into a character for you.
Funny, I kind of already done that, but
Oh, cool.
it doesn't look like it, but I'll explain it.
All right, I'm turning mine into it. Which changes a lot as I do that, actually. Huh. Sometimes I don't know why I doodle what I doodle. If you don't know why you doodled what you doodle, that's okay too. So what did you doodle, Suzanne?
Well, it's kind of this ginormous mess thing. And then just before the end, I put this. So what came to mind for me is this is my person. This is like their shoulders, their oh, sorry. That's the alarm where I'd normally take my kids to school. That's the their shoulders, and this is the weight of what they're carrying. And it felt like a backpack or whatever, and they had tried to have a containment, but it just kind of went everywhere, and it just felt heavy and like, oh, that's so this is my representation of a person's shoulders.
Yeah, no, that feels like I resonate with that. Like it's no boundaries, like not setting boundaries outside of you actually makes it hard to be clear inside of you.
Yes.
Like it really translates. It makes everything feel very overwhelming, which is interesting. So I used red too. This is what happened. I don't know. I just felt this like squished feeling of like compression and like, the fears around setting boundaries are very tight. Like they feel very tight to me, and like I'm trying to control something and hold on to something that maybe isn't even serving me, right? Probably isn't. But and it feels like a lot of pressure, both to live up to what I think their expectations are, and pressure to actually like to do something. Like if I'm trying to set a boundary, there's sometimes the pressure will come up to around, whenever we start to change our behaviors, right? It creates tension. So we feel kind of, or I can feel kind of like squished in that tension space. So that's sort of what came up.
That makes me think of for both of them? It makes me think of when we become so attached, like you mentioned, the control, become so attached to how we think something should go, we're not actually present to what's happening.
Yes.
Because it's like, I wanted it to be like this.
Yes.
This. But this is actually what's going on. And we're completely detached from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like suddenly that like focus on not even what, like it just squeezes the focus and all this is happening. Yes. And I think in that way for me, it's like, it actually makes, I actually feel like it makes me paint not a great picture of a lot of people in that light. Like, it's like, I'm not giving people enough credit oftentimes when I'm in that space. I'm not thinking of how resourceful they are or like how capable they are or like how caring they are, like it's very like narcissistic in a way, it's like I've made this about me.
It is. People pleasing is just as manipulative as narcissism. That's another thing I didn't like to hear in the beginning. It's just that one is covert and one is overt, because you're manipulating people to get what you want, because as you said, you're not trusting in their resourcefulness, their capability, like, oh, they need me. And when I realized that nobody needs me, like they desire me or they want to hang out with me or they enjoy being with me, there's freedom in that. When you're like, oh, they're only here because they need me, that's heavy.
Yeah, it is. And it's really, let me ask you this. Do you feel that these, how do I want to phrase this? This is like a new thought that's in my head, but do you feel like this, do you experience from working with your folks, like that this people pleasing mode, this lack of boundaries mode is a way to distract them from something else that they don't want to face about themselves or their world or their life? Does
100%. Because
yeah.
when you think about it, it's kind of like, when you've got a task to do, whether it be write a blog or, do your invoicing or something that's kind of important, kind of, but then you're like, oh, I just need to check my email, clean my lint filter. Like, you get distracted by things. So it's kind of like, if I set this goal, I want to write a book, I want to, whatever your goal is, build the business, find the love of my life, have a child, I don't know. But then it's kind of like, yeah, what if that doesn't work out? Or it's unknown, so it's scary. So I'm going to go and find people to help, because then I can feel like I'm being of service and I don't actually have to risk the rejection or failure of not getting a thing I truly want. And then you can kind of blame them. Oh, my kids are so needy. Oh, my husband needs me to do this stuff all the time. It's his fault. You kind of let yourself off the hook.
Mm-hmm. And you're really looking, like what I hear you saying too, is like, you're really looking to other people to fulfill yourself. Not that they're not needed or wanted and all that stuff, but like when it comes to being truly fulfilled, there's like an aspect of your own vision, goals, and things.
Yeah, and we see that we become the number one, number two. Like we see that often with parents who push their kids to learn an instrument or do a sport or do something that the kid isn't really even interested in, but the parent wanted when they were a child and didn't have the means or the support or whatever. But it's like, but did they actually want that? And also, could you do this as an adult? Like, you might not make the Olympics or be super competitive, but there's so many things that you can do at any age, but we write ourselves off because, oh, I'm too old, it's too late for me. And it's like, no, I could go and do this. I could learn to ice skate, or I could, draw. It might not make a museum or be featured, but it's like, why don't we let ourselves get fulfillment from the things that we want to do instead of finding someone else to live vicariously through? Julia Cameron, she calls that the shadow artist. It's like, instead of going after the thing yourself, you'll become like, the number one, number two for someone else. Like somebody might want to write their own book desperately, but fear rejection or failure or whatever. So they'll become an editor. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's like, it's not quite fulfilling the itch that person has.
Yes. Yeah. There's, a phrase that I heard recently. I can't remember who said it actually. If I remember it, I'll put some credit in the show notes. But somebody was talking about the big hunger versus the little hungers. And it kind of makes me think of that. Like, what's your big hunger? And are you snacking all day long instead of filling it up? Because, if you snack all day long, how do you feel at the end of the day? Kind of gross, not quite fulfilled. but if you just, have a snack here and there, but then have some nice meals, then at the end of the day, you're kind of like, oh, that was good. Like, I feel good, about how I fed myself that day. So it makes me think
Yes.
about that. It's like, how do you, in terms of boundaries, how do you help people to decide between or decipher between the idea of a boundary and a wall? Right? Like,
Boundaries, I think, are more like gates that you can open or close. Like you can choose to let somebody in or let yourself out. Because also, what goes understated a lot of the time is boundaries with self. Because we tend to look at boundaries of other people, but how often have we joined a gym or written a meal plan and then we never turn up, so or our veggies are wilting in the fridge while we eat cheap and cheerful because it makes everybody happy. So a boundary is something that you can open and close, whereas a wall is there's nothing there. It's a barricade that you can't come through. And the thing is, sometimes it's funny, we're on the Doodle podcast, so my hand-drawn slides. Here's something I use in my program. So a weak boundary, so ideally this would be the boundary, but it's not there at all. So you say yes to everything. So everything can come in. And then you don't get anywhere. And often when we get tired of this, we go to the other end, which is the really rigid boundary, which is your wall. We say no to everything, nothing can come in, but you also can't get out. Yeah. So you feel isolated, and you've isolated yourself. And then you tend to think the only way I can have connection is by doing everything for everyone. And you pendulum swing between these two. And this is really, really common. But whereas a healthy boundary is you have that like the perimeter, but you have these gates that you can open and close, that you can choose what you let in and choose what you say no to. And it's going to change, because the thing is, often we don't know what we don't know. So you might set a boundary and then go, actually, I thought this is how I'd feel, but I don't. And then from that place, you can renegotiate it. But other times, and also your boundaries are your own. It doesn't mean other people have to be like that. You're not knocking at the door trying to convert them to your boundary way. Like for me, I don't do DMs in any way, shape or form. I don't enjoy them. I don't sell via them. I've actually disabled them from my business Facebook profile. I would from Instagram if you could, but I haven't worked out how yet. I like people to email me. If somebody did get through, like they send me a personal DM or something, thank you so much for reaching out. I don't actually answer DMs. Here's my email, fling it through there. You might think, oh, they might be offended, or I'm making so much work for them, or whatever. If they're not going to respect my boundary at the very beginning of a connection relationship, then is it something that I want to foster? Like, as long as you educate with love, you don't like ghost, or you don't like, what are you doing? Like, who do you think I am? Not that kind of thing, but just saying, thank you so much. This isn't how I communicate. And then other people who do connect via DM, like, so say you, or I don't know, but say you're all about DMs, Karen, and your post says, send me a DM. And I'm like, oh, I'm interested in this. I could choose to connect in that way and then come out of my boundary. Like I could be like, in this stage, I'm going to say yes. And Karen and I can converse by DMs. Doesn't mean I need to do it everywhere with everyone. Or it might be like, actually, this isn't a place I want to hang out. So, it's a no from me.
When you were talking, I thought of a funny story related to this. Want to hear it?
Yes.
From personal experience, right? So I've come a long way from my zero boundaried life. And eventually I had to bring boundaries into my dating life, right? So a few years after I was divorced, I was definitely doing a lot of dating, and I had a therapist at the time. I was people pleasing like crazy. I was conflict avoidant. I was like just terrified of that whole thing. And but as somebody who's also a teacher, if you give me an assignment, I'm pretty like I feel like a lot of obligation to fulfill it. And he gave me an assignment, which was to just say if you disagree with something in the course of an evening. I'd gone out on a number of dates with this guy. I had zero conflict, zero disagreements at this point. And so my assignment was recognize that you actually disagree with one thing and say it. Well, what did that lead to? That led to like more of a wall situation, because I was so unpracticed, right? So, you know, we were spending time together, and it was after a long day, and he kind of fell asleep while we were watching a movie. And I had a long day too. I worked with like kids in like terrible situations. Like my days were long. And so it just made me so angry. I was just like, no, we don't spend that much time together. I need you to be awake for it. That's a clear boundary, right? You could say that. You said it somewhere, like you could say that in a kind way. Like we can say our boundaries with kindness, but I had no nuance. I had no nuance. So I didn't say anything. I left, I got in my car, and I was like, wait a second, I had an assignment. And I knocked on the door, opened the door like half asleep. And I was like, when we're together, you stay awake for it or don't call me again. Like, got in my car and drove off. Never heard from him again. So, I share that story because these things take practice when we're the first learning it.
100%.
I'm the first to like admit that I was clunky as hell learning how to set these boundaries. And a lot of times my boundaries turned into walls. Like, no, that person was like, she crazy. I'm never calling her again. Right. So
But it's such a great example that often when we're wanting to learn a new skill, we go to people who are experienced at it, and then we look at where they are and how the examples they give, and then we're like, oh, but if we were like getting physically fit here and we were like, okay, how much do you curl, Suzanne? And I'm like, I curl 20 kilos, and you can't even lift one. You trying to lift 20 kilos is going to result in an injury.
right.
So like starting where you are and going, oh, okay, so that was clunky. Like that wasn't my best work.
Mhm.
What did I do well? You're like, okay, what did I do well? I followed the assignment. Like I paused and realized this wasn't okay for me. What didn't I do so well? I wait until after the situation and I can't, and then what would I do differently? So the 3 questions that can be total game changers, because you're right, you're not going to be good at it. If you think of something that you do effortlessly now, like driving a car, chances are, if you're like me, you get in, you're singing along, you're at the destination. When you first drove a car, like all the things that you do now without thinking, put your seatbelt on, check your mirrors, like, you do all of that. But in the beginning, there was a lot of effort behind that. I was like, oh, I'm bunny hopping, and would I change the gear? And, so when you start this boundary thing, give yourself a bit of grace, like, oh yeah, that wasn't my best work. That cost that relationship potentially. But then again, what am I going to do differently next time? Or what did I learn? Rather than putting up with a behavior that is a boundary cross for you.
And what you just said gives me inspiration for a doodle prompt, because
Oh, yes.
for all you people pleasers out there, my guess is that there have been times when you've set a boundary and you've done it well, right? So even if it feels hard or not practiced, there have been times. And I'm a big fan of this idea of starting with what's going well. So I want you to think to a time where you did maybe this boundary thing okay. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but you did something about it okay. And I just want you to capture something about that moment so that you can really carry it with you as a visual, as a great starting place. All right, how's it going?
I didn't know what I was doing at first, but now it
Yeah.
kind of started down the bottom of the page and it was quite wavy. And then as I went up the page, it got smoother. And then I felt like this moving up the page. And I thought, when you first start at something, it's got quite a few bumps in it. And then, you kind of smooth it out with practice. And that's what the visual comes from.
Yeah. So expect the bumpy ride at first, like
Yeah.
ex- set like helpful expectations for yourself at the beginning.
Yeah. And also too, I suppose the other thing is choose where you want to start this. So like, perhaps you're like, I'm going to start this. Like for me, I remember my own boundary journey or being able to say no journey. I started bizarre things. Like I used to be the person, I was the upsell queen. You want fries with that? Yes. Do you want this? Yes. Do you want that? Yes. I couldn't say no to anything. So like basic things like, do you want a plastic bag? No, thanks. Like, starting there and then working along rather than starting with like, my partner or somebody who seems very loaded.
I like that. I mean, I have a very clear memory too of a friend trying to help me out. And, this is so simple, but it was something that was so hard for me, which was like, we went for a ride and we were on a road trip and she's like, disagree with me or ask for something, like just something along the way, because she was very privy to what I was trying to work on in therapy. And I remember I was feeling so cold, and it took me forever to like even become aware, right, that I was so cold because I was so adverse to speaking up about stuff. But suddenly I had the realization of like, oh, I'm cold. Oh, I want to lower the AC. This is too cold for me. It's not okay. Right. Like, and then saying something. And it's just the AC in a car driving with a friend. But that's how it can start. And it's funny because that's actually what came up for me when I drew it out was just, I think when you're not used to thinking in that way, even the self-awareness that what is happening is not okay for you is awesome. Even if you don't take the step to say something about it yet, like actually being aware that I'm not okay with something that's happening. I don't know what to do about it yet. I don't know what to say. I'm too afraid, but at least I have that awareness. Now I can work on those next steps, So
That's
that
a
was
huge
something.
thing. Like the being able to recognize, like it's funny if you ask people, how are you today? The go-to is fine, thanks, how are you? Or good, thanks. Or, before you run something, like, how are you feeling? I'm all good. And it's like, does anyone actually do a body check? Like, how are you feeling? My back's a little stiff. My shoulders are a little heavy. Like, it's like, oh, I don't, but we don't actually check in. So taking the time, whether or not you voice it or communicate it, to know that is such a great place to begin.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how you said that with your friend. So in my program that I teach, I say to my clients, if what I say doesn't resonate for you, it gets to be my truth and not yours. That is okay. But looking at that's a no from me, but what is your truth? Like, and I am very much an introvert. I'm very upfront about that. And I said once as an offhand comment that, introverts, the world never tells extroverts to shut up. This tells introverts, don't be so quiet, whatever. And one of my clients, she sat with it. And then on the next call, she's like, can I say something? I'm like, please. She goes, I get told to shut up all the time. I hadn't seen that frame. And then she's like, I feel so nervous about this. And I was like, oh, okay, because we see what we experience.
Mm-hmm.
But, like to me, it was like, I get told, be more assertive or whatever. It's like, I'm not assertive. I don't have anything to say right now.
It's true. I mean, that's been a big experience of mine as well. And I love what you said about like, if it doesn't resonate for you, it gets to be my truth. That's what we do with doodles all the time where we're looking at them, right? I'm always encouraging people, be open to what's shared. But if it's not for you, then maybe it's for the person who shared it, and in that way we serve each other too. It's not just me serving you. It's a much more meaningful exchange. So I'd love it if you could share some more morsels, some more tips to help people say no when they need to set boundaries, to be like, you know what, this isn't okay with me, or this is what I need right now. What are some go-to pieces of wisdom that you have?
Given it's the Doodle podcast and everyone will have pen and paper, simplest tool for boundaries is to grab a square of paper. So if you've got your journal, like tear out a piece.
Mm-hmm.
And on one side of it, write yes.
Okay. One side of it, we're writing yes. Okay.
And flip it over. And on the other side, you write no.
I need a different color because
I
that's
love
me.
this.
Okay.
And then what I want you to do is imagine something that you're doing purely for you. It's not a work task. It's like, I want to read a book. I want to sew. I want to dance. I want to sing. I don't know, whatever it is. And you've carved out the time. This is your hobby. And you're really looking forward to doing it. And you're just getting started. And somebody, a loved one, a child, a partner comes over and is like, can you just, help me find something or whatever. When you say yes to them, so hold a little piece of paper out towards them saying yes, what are you saying to you?
No.
So this is such a great thing to have. So like, I literally have these little signs. I made them up with my kids. So here's one I prepared earlier. You said you like colors. My son did this one. He's written his name on it.
Very talented.
And we have them around the place. So say, for example, like this is my office. Outside my office door right now is the sign that says no. And they know, bar an emergency, they can't come in here until I finish this call. Well, they've gone to school, but if I was working at home, if it said yes, if I'm just doing emails or back office stuff, they can come in and ask for something. And the thing is, it sounds so simple, because it is, but when you first start to do something like this, what you realize is you need to have a whole other conversation about what constitutes an emergency. So I remember the first time I got this piece of paper and I explained to the kids, if it's on no, you can't come in. And I said, unless it's really important. Made sense to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, sitting down at my computer, starting to type. My daughter comes barreling in. I'm like, is it really important? And she's like, yes. I'm like, what is it? I can fit 27 blueberries in my mouth. And I'm like, oh. We have a very different definition of what important is.
Yes.
So like sometimes the whole process of setting boundaries is discussing what is okay for you and what is not okay for you, and not getting frustrated with them. Like, oh, I've told them. It's communicating it and having a discussion. Well, okay, that's important to you. What I mean by important is, so like now it's like, do we need to call the hospital? Is there blood? Like these are the definitions, and it can seem sometimes really so basic, but it's amazing what we don't know. And example at the top of this call, I was telling Karen, I was saying to you, hey, I've got my texters. You didn't know that phrase. To you, like, so there's cultural stuff, or we live in different, but we even have that in our heads. Like, and the other thing is, the biggest tip for setting boundaries, make sure you have the person's full attention. Like for me, I remember when I was first starting my boundary journey, psyching myself up, getting ready, I'm going to go and tell my husband this thing. And I go and tell him, and he's like, yeah, I've got it. And then the next time it doesn't get respected and I'm crying in the corner thinking my husband doesn't love me, he's playing the Xbox. Don't ever tell my husband anything when he's playing the Xbox, because he'll just say yes to get me out of the way. Right. So, like asking the person, I have something that's important to me. Are you available now to discuss this? And then again, if your boundaries are poor, like if you sent me an email saying we need to talk, that would used to cue me to panic. So like making sure you're not inadvertently putting them in a stressful situation, but making sure, is it a time that you're both available to discuss it? And is it a hard line boundary for you, or is it let's negotiate? So say, for example, like I have ways that I like to be contacted, and it can sound so bizarre because some people just don't care. But what used to happen is if somebody sent me a DM and I didn't respond, then they send me a WhatsApp, then they send me a text message, I felt like I'm being chased around the internet. I don't like this. Yes. So there's some things that I'm like, I don't communicate to clients in this, like WhatsApp. It's so funny. Most people use that for business. I only use WhatsApp for my family. That's a boundary there. So there's one client I've negotiated with because she lives in South Africa. So that's really the only social thing that they have. In that case, 100%. But it's like, it's first of all, working out what you want. Second of all, how to articulate it that you have their full attention. And third, that they understood what you actually meant, and not making it mean like I could think, oh, my kids don't care about me or they don't respect me. No, they just didn't understand. Right. Like sometimes it's a failure to communicate that we don't realize. And
hearing you talk, it brings up another thing that I think is often a misconception, which is like setting boundaries can be a process. Like it's not one and done all the time, because there are misunderstandings, or people are coming from different ways, or you did say it when somebody was distracted, but also because you're changing dynamics and sometimes with those boundaries, and you're changing habits of behavior. And it took us how long to get in that habit? So how long might it take? How much repetition might it take? And like how, I have a lot of clients who are 20 something, and their schedules tend to be very different. They're like in transition between college and moving out, and they're usually very creative people. They tend to be up at night, let's say, and want to sleep in the morning, and their parents see that and like freak out, because that means, oh, my kid's not going to be successful. They're failing. They're sleeping away their life, whatever it is. All their fears get projected on sleep schedule sometimes. And, so this is a big thing. I think with like 70% of my clients, I work with this of like, you are allowed to set the boundary around your sleep schedule. Like, you are an adult, you get to pick your sleep schedule, but don't expect one conversation to change it. Like, don't expect them to not be afraid anymore, to not fall back into panic, to not be triggered and bring it up with you and want you to do something different, because that is a process. These boundaries can really be a process.
100%. So I like, yes, a process. And another way that I think helps me with the process is I call it the traffic light system. So in Australia, I assume most places in the world, but just for clarification, just in case, once again, we never know. Green is go, red is stop, orange is supposed to be slow down. It usually means floor it to get through.
Beat up, right?
Technically, if you're following the rules, it's slow down. So if you have a boundary that is being upheld, you're having a green light. If I say, don't DM me, and people don't DM me, life is great.
Mm-hmm.
If we have a boundary that, someone continually violates, it's a red light. And then sometimes it's an orange light. So like it could happen once. And then we decide, do we let it go? Because sometimes we do. We think, oh, it's just that once, and we let it go. But then we're opening a door that becomes harder and harder to close. So, say that example with, I can understand. You're creative, you work when you want to work. Like, I have clients all around the world. My boundary is you can contact me anytime, 24/7. Like, putting my phone on silent is my responsibility.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'm the same way.
So, however, I will respond to you Monday to Thursday, 9 to 5 Australian Eastern Standard Time. So like content, because the thing is, I know what it's like to be in the flow and have this amazing idea and want to share it. And then I get to the coaching call and I'm like, oh, I don't know what day it is. So,
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So,
yes.
It's something I negotiate with the coaches I work with too. It's like, I want to message you when I think of it. If I have to hold it for a session, like, we don't have to unpack it. I don't expect you to coach me between sessions, but I got to capture it when it's there. So with the family example, if you're saying to your parents, like, I'm working on this project, however much you want to share with them is totally up to you, but just gently reminding them that I don't work a 9 to 5. Like, I had this with my own family. I come from a traditionally employed family and I'm an entrepreneur. And in the beginning, oh, your little hobby used to drive me up the wall. Oh, you're not doing anything, your little hobby. And they'd just ring me whenever. Oh, you're not doing anything anyway. Like, you're not, and I just had to say, like, I would love to talk to you. Send me a text message. Tell me when you're available. Especially my parents, they were retired. I could talk to them anytime. It's not that I don't want to talk to you. It's that I can't, when I'm in flow, I can't get off the podcast and say sorry. And what would happen is they would continuously ring. So when I did get off a podcast and saw 10 missed calls, my immediate thought is somebody's died. And then I would panic, and it didn't suit either of us. So like, you just say to your parents, whatever way works for you. Like, I love that you're concerned about me. I get it. I appreciate, your outreach. This isn't helping. Like, this is how, my process is different. Just reminding, like, it also reminds me of introverts and extroverts. I'm an introvert from an extroverted family. There's nothing wrong with me. I don't hate everybody. I just need to be alone at times. Like, if I get too much for me at Christmas, I need to leave the table and go and sit in a room for 10 minutes with silence. And just that, and even to this day, I still have to remind them of that, because we see the world the way we see the world and what we make it mean.
Yes.
Like, the thing is, if someone needs to talk to me all the time, I would make that mean from my point of view. I don't know, that they're insecure or whatever, but maybe that's just how they process, whereas I process on my own. And not everyone has that self-awareness to realize that we're different.
Yeah. And it's like, when you have those, so that feels like such an integral part, right? We haven't said that overtly until now, but that self-awareness is the direct feeder to knowing what your boundaries are. I'm introverted. I need 10 minutes away. Or, for me, I need my morning time. I need my morning time to be slow. I need to be left alone on the couch. I live in a very small house with my partner. Like, so I have to voice those things. Like I'm going to be sitting on the couch right now doing my meditations. And then he knows, right? Then he knows, okay, I'm not going to bug her or ask her any questions about the day, even though he could get up and talk immediately. I don't want to do that. And,
Yeah, and just
uh-huh.
that reminding, like, this is what I need. It's not to say this is how the world is or this is what you need.
Right.
Like, I appreciate that, you're different. When I go away a couple of times a year, I go for a staycation. I book a hotel in like the next suburb. I don't actually go anywhere. And I spend some time away from my children. And when I'm there, I do not call them. And other people, they don't understand that. They're like, aren't you worried or can't you call? I'm like, I know that if I'm needed, my husband will call.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the point of me going away to then constantly ring constantly and be on the phone to them every day?
Right.
So it's like, I don't, but some people need that check-in. They need that touch point. They need to be told, I'm okay, Mum, I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all right too. It's just not me.
Yeah. And it's so important to have those boundaries with ourselves, especially if you're working for yourself, if you're a creative, a freelancer or entrepreneur. Like, I know what mindset I need to be in for certain tasks, right? For certain parts of my day. And it took me a while, but eventually what I established is like no meeting Fridays. Like, I'm not meeting with anybody on a Friday. Like, I need a day where I know I am free. Like, I will be working my tail end off that day, but on what I'm carried to work on, like in the flow. Usually it's my illustration work. I might be drawing and then have a blog idea, and like, I just want to be in that flow. I'm getting closer and closer to cutting back my Thursdays even. But like those pieces, like, what do you need for yourself to be in the mindset? And setting boundaries with yourself reinforces the idea to you that your time is valuable, so that you don't let other people step on it, right? Like, if you work for yourself, it might not look to other people, especially if you're in a creative space. It's so important to just be like wandering around for me, especially in the mornings. It looks like I'm doing nothing. But I tell you what, by the time I sit down, if I've allowed myself to have that time, I know what I'm doing that day. I'm inspired. I have something I want to write and share. I have something I want to create. I can't wait to talk to this person about this. And it's just like, you have to value that, set the boundaries around it, and share them with other people, sometimes repeatedly, because it doesn't necessarily look like what other people think is productive.
Yeah. And what your creative process is, it's funny. I didn't realize that this was my creative process for years. So I went to uni, I wrote a thesis, I did all these things. And some people, and what's taught, in productivity circles or whatever, is here's the deadline, here's the parts I'm going to work on, I'm going to chunk away at this. And I don't work like that at all. Basically, here's the deadline. Here's me. I loved how you said wandering around. Wandering what looks like aimlessly,
Mm-hmm.
Tidying, decluttering, like, it's going on in my subconscious or even my conscious. And then towards what looks like the 11th hour, Suze brings it all together.
Mm-hmm.
And it irks my engineer husband, who works the methodical way, no end. He's like, how do you do anything like that? And then very recently I had this deadline. I had a project I had to submit, and I was like, oh, this is never going to get done. And I was having a moment, like we all have a moment. And my very methodical engineer husband's like, don't forget, this is your process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when it came together at the end, it was so good. You would have thought it was, but it felt like.
Yes. And that's just, it's one of the biggest areas of life that I think I've noticed with boundaries, is like being able to stick to my way of doing something, being like, not letting other people's ideas, especially if it looks wrong than like, the norm, sway me off of that course, because that creates all these feelings of stress and overwhelm. And like, I don't know, just brings up all the things that aren't brought up when I just do it my way. I'm just like, this is who I am. This is what I'm centered in, and not needing other people to understand it, not needing to always explain it, just saying this is how it is. So I'm going to do that now. And, and even being able to say, like, I don't want to talk about it with you because you're not going to get it. So I'm not going to talk about it with A, B, and C. Like, those are boundaries I have with myself too. Like, these certain
That
people
is such a
in my life,
great boundary.
I
So
won't
how I
talk
call
about
that
that.
one is choose your audience. So say I'm
Mm.
having what I call my business period where I freak out and I'm going to go and get a job, you know, happens about
Yep.
once a month. Like we
Yep.
all have it.
Uh-huh.
I do not speak to my traditionally employed husband about that because he'd be like, of course, you've got so many skills and blah, 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 you know. Then I go to my biz bestie. Oh my God, I'm terrible. I'm going to have to go and stock shelves. And she's like, oh my God, get off the shelf, get off the ledge. You're fine. You know, but like choosing who you have that moment with,
Mhm.
that can support you, because sometimes we sabotage ourselves. Like if I ever had gone to my parents with, I'm not sure about my business thing, they would have been like, go back to university,
Yeah.
get a degree, because that's the only way from their frame of reference that they see life.
Mhm.
But it's like, okay, so that shouldn't be something I have shared with them, and that is all right. Or if I'm questioning a parenting thing I had in mind, I've parented very different to them, they'd be like, well, you should spank your children or something, which I don't, and I'm wholly unavailable for. And then it's like, kids of today, it's because they don't have enough discipline. And it's like, yeah, this is not the time to have this conversation. But you get to choose where you put yourself in these things, or does it need to be talked about at all? Sometimes just looking at it and going, okay, yeah, I'm having a moment. And instead of freaking out about existentially where your life's going and whatever, it's like, it's a Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, what is the reality of this situation? And
Mhm.
just enough to bring you back and center yourself in where you are. Because we all have moments where our mind goes away from us.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and those practices of choosing our audience, knowing when it's good just to be with ourselves, like all of those self boundaries really, I think, make it almost safer to go through them. Like you're like, okay, there's like a secure place for me to experience this. Like I can, like, because I have the same thing. Every now and then I'm just like, oh my God, let me look at all the job postings. But I'm like, okay. I also don't, I'm not going to say this to certain people, and I'm not going to, I'm going to give myself 2 hours to look at these, and then I'm going to switch, like those boundaries with myself. Like I usually, after 2 hours of looking at job postings, I'm just horrified and I can't even
And you remind
stomach the
yourself why you
idea.
don't want to work at a job in the first place.
Yeah, that I'm just like, it makes me go back and double down on everything that I do. Basically, it like gives me new conviction. So let's come back to that square. I told you we are going to revisit it, but I want you, like, I love that you had those doodle examples of boundaries, because I really want to bring this into it. I want you to redraw a square, just one square this time, taking up most of your paper. But how would you change how you drew that square, thinking about it in the way we were talking about boundaries, as like
Ooh,
gates, or
yes.
as something that you can consider in every present moment, or consider your audience. And, there's some flexibility there. You don't want to have a wall. How would you draw your square just a little bit different? So
And
mine, very simply, see, it's very light. Does it show up even?
it is very light. Yeah, I can just make it out.
Yeah. It felt like I liked how you had like openings. So I have some openings. But it also felt like softer to me in this conversation, in the way of like it nurtures, and you can kind of feel your way through it. I don't know, I just kind of felt,
I like the wavy kind of aspect to the.
yeah, like it's like, I can kind of calibrate to what needs to happen here and now, if I need to, with this person's different than with this person, or And I don't have to do it in a way with myself or with other people that feels harsh. I mean, sometimes when people don't respect it, we got to lay the hammer a bit. But like in general, most people, most of the time, and with ourselves, it's like this can be a kind thing. Like this can be a really wonderful thing for everybody involved. So just made me kind of feel that.
I'm going to jump on the kind word there. Brene Brown says clear is kind,
Clear is
which
kind.
I love.
So good.
Because when we don't have boundaries and we're trying to be nice, like nice is not kind.
Mm-hmm.
Nice is, we're not forming real relationships if we're at a worry that the second we say no, that's all going to dissolve.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, kind, it's like, oh yeah, she's available today or she's not. And then they get to choose. And as you said, they're not reliant or helpless. They're resourced enough to go, oh, I'll go find someone else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love that. So mine, it's two. So after I drew it, I was kind of thinking inner and outer, like so, inner boundaries self and outer boundaries others. And also with the gaps, it may slightly inconvenience people. Like, my boundaries may slightly inconvenience people, but the trust that they'll find their way in, or I'll find my way, we'll find our way together, as opposed to it just being nice and I'll do everything for everyone, but it's not in service to either of us. So I just, inner and outer, and then, that kind of finding your way might take it's not direct. It's a little,
I love how they're not lined up. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that just really speaks to our humanness. Like, if you really want to be, and like you said before, like sometimes we feel these filter people out, right? Like if you really want to be with me, I'm messy. I'm a messy human, and I expect you to be a messy human. And if you really want to be in a relationship with me, then we both have to want to navigate that messiness together. We both have to want to have enough energy and investment there. Okay, so let's close our eyes because we're going to do one more thing, but I want you to imagine it first. So you have this new version of a square. So just take a little nice deep breath or small breath, whatever. Just fill yourself up with breath. And as you breathe out, feel your body relax. Because in our relaxed state, that's when we really open up our imagination and inspiration. So even in one nice deep breath does a lot. And bring your focus to your imagination space and picture this square rectangle-y thing that you just drew. What starts to appear within that shape because of these boundaries? What do you get to have? What is kept sacred for you? What do you get to experience or feel because of these boundaries? And as you start to see something there, slowly blink your eyes open and just doodle it out for a few minutes. Feel like I could work on this one for a while, but I'm just going to wrap it up and then play with it some more. I tend to do that on these final drawings. I tend to keep them around for a few days and add
Oh,
to
it's
them.
funny. I wished I could capture what I saw in my mind on the page, but the image is clear. But for me, it was growth. It was I'll just show it to you. It was like foliage.
Yeah.
It was like so much greenery. And
Mm.
then I was thinking about before, without clear boundaries, it was like there was one bud that I had to protect with everything. So it was kind of like, like we put a lot of energy into protecting this, but and also I guess that's why we do. If I've only got one bud and I say no and it gets chopped down, I've got nothing.
Yeah.
Whereas if I've got this whole forest foliage growing thing, then there's no fear in saying no, because there's plenty of others. Like one of these branches could take a hit and the rest of the plant might actually be out of stronger, like you prune in order to grow.
Mhm.
Whereas if that's all you have and you're reliant fully on that, then there's fear. So that's the real image I got, like just growth.
Yeah. I like how it reminds me too, when I just looking at it imagely, like the imagery, like oftentimes when you create a graph and there's like it starts in the left-hand corner like that and then like goes up and it kind of looks like it's like it started off really tight and together in the corner. And then as you continue to progress with those boundaries, it really spreads out and becomes that abundant.
Actually, that's given me an image that I didn't have before, but I could add to it, and I will let it, like branching off, because as you said, it starts there, but then as the, because the branches will come off from up here, not just from that corner. So
Yeah.
yes.
And it's interesting too, because it also looks like it's in some sort of picture frame. I think especially because you have the two.
Yes.
And it makes me think about like what memories you will get to have because you have kept your boundaries. Like what will you want to what do you want to remember about your life? And if you have your boundaries, if you hold certain things sacred, then you get to create those things that you really want from your life, that are snapshots that you want to take with you and share. And it makes me think about that too.
And a quick addition to that for anyone listening, a great boundary thing to have, especially if it's family, relationship, or close friend, to say, I don't remember it that way. So it's not saying you're wrong, or, because sometimes we can all disagree on what happened. Like, I remember it this way from my experience. Like, you can have, I've had things before with my kids where I've been like, oh, the worst mum ever, or whatever. And they're like, this was so much fun. Like, they remember it differently. It can be for us too, at a time, a situation that was difficult for us, somebody else enjoyed, but was it at the expense of us? So when we start to set the boundaries, like, oh, but didn't we have so much fun back then? It's not saying no or they're wrong. It's like, I don't remember it that way.
That's a really good tool. I love that. It's really helpful because I think it even, saying that makes people think about other perspectives too. And it's like, oh, it's a point of discussion, not a I'm wrong, a shut
Yeah,
down
I'm
of the
right, you're wrong, this
conversation.
happened.
Which
And
is,
it's like, yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And one of the beautiful things that I'm loving about how you're sharing about boundaries is that it's an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to open up discussion. And maybe that's an indication of a wall, is when you're using them to shut it down, in this very kind of way. You're right, I'm wrong. Here's what came up for me.
Oh, I love the colors.
Thanks. I was just thinking, like, boundaries are so important to me to preserve my soul, like the soul things that I want to do, my soul work, things that feel soulful. And it's very easy to let that go. It's very, when it's not really something that is very valued in our Western world. And then it's very like, seems low on the priority list for many people because it's not obviously productive or obviously responsible or obviously blah, blah, blah. But to me, boundaries allow me to play in that space. One of the metaphors I often give people, a lot of us creatives are kind of structure adverse, which I think can translate very easily into boundaries. But I think about, like, if you're a mom living on a corner lot of busy streets, and you want your kid to play in the yard, isn't it so much better to have a fence? like so that you can just let them roam free. You're not putting a fence around the sandbox or around the swing set. You're not like limiting. You're just creating a place to play. And that's what boundaries are a lot for me. When I set boundaries with my time, with my energy, with what I want, with what I don't want, with what's okay. I say yes. I say yes to being the playful being that I want to be, to being the creative being that I want to be, to being, and I also had like light coming out because I think you can have boundaries, and even though you're not directly relating to somebody sees those boundaries, and can be enlightening to them. Like you could still reach them in these really positive ways that maybe you're not considering because you're so afraid of saying no, like they see that
Gives me
and
lighthouse
that can
vibes.
affect them.
Yeah. So I love that heart, that made me think heart led, and then the colors, like the lighthouse guides people home. But the thing, I love the example you gave about the backyard. Like you want the children to play, but also the safety that they're not going to run onto the road or whatever. The other way I think about boundaries for people who are, structure averse, because I know I am too. This is my water bottle here. If I want to consume the water, but if there's no bottle around it, then it's just a puddle on the floor, I can't consume it at all. Like I get down on my hands and knees or it's soaking. Like, I can't drink this. So it's like a boundary is a way to, structure something, not necessarily to contain or restrict, but it's like so that I can use it.
Yeah.
So if you have your creativity and it's not structured at all, like depending on how you want to use it, if you're writing a book or something, you could sit down at the computer and just pound out at the keyboard all day and every day. There comes a point where the left and right hemisphere need to meet.
Yeah.
So that then at the end you have a book or a poem or something that you can share. Otherwise it's just words on a page.
And you won't find that fulfilling ultimately. Yes, the process itself should be amazing, and I'm all about that. But it's also part of the satisfaction is saying, here's the thing. Here's the thing I did. Here's what that time was spent doing. Now I can share this with you. I can connect with you through this thing.
Another way you can think about boundaries is if you're making a cake and we have all the ingredients, like the flour and the milk and the eggs and whatever. If we don't do them in the right order, like if we put the plain flour in the oven and it kind of gets burnt, and then we crack the egg onto the top, and you have a mess. It's not the same nice
Never actually visualized doing that before.
Whereas it's kind of like having boundaries, and that's why you'll kind of have to touch and go and experiment. Some people like flourless cake, and some people like vanilla cake, and some people like chocolate cake. So your boundary will be your cake, your formula, your things put together, and it can also change over time. Like different things happen in your life, and you might need to bring your boundaries in closer or experiment out further. But it's not set by anybody else. It's not to contain, but it's so that you can make best use of the ingredients that you have.
And I think that's a fabulous way to wrap this up by thinking about what kind of cake you want to bake. Like, what a great way to wrap this up and think about structure. So thank you for that. And thank you for this conversation, Suzanne. I really recommend that everybody gets to know her better, and I'll include her links in the show description. But what a pleasure to talk about boundaries with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen. It's been fabulous.
Of course. So thanks everyone for watching. As always, I love to see what you create. Don't hesitate to reach out to me, show me your doodles, tell me about your doodles, and you can always find out more at howdoodle.com. Until next time, have a good one.